As Warren Buffett once said, everything's a nail to a hammer. Here is a classic case of rising damp proofing treatment where the damp proofing slurry, the impermeable slurry, has been taken up the wall to about 600-800 mil. The slurry is impermeable there to try and stop the water, but what happens is if the dampness continues, such as condensation, which is the most common form of damp that's treated as rising damp, you'll get the vapor condensing behind the damp proofing slurry, causing calcium sulfate, that is the salt used primarily to make cement and plaster. The calcium sulfate dissolves, comes to the surface and blisters behind the damp proofing slurry. It's benign in the sense that it doesn't cause any damage, but it doesn't look good and will need to be rubbed down with sandpaper before repainting. The primary issue with this property is there's no ventilation in the kitchen. It's open plan, there's condensation clearly forming on the pipes below the kitchen sink. Looking at the thermal image, the pipes look warmer than the wall at this time of the day, but when it's cold, the water will come in at about 8 degrees centigrade, causing heat loss in the pipe and causing the wall to become cold, increasing the risk of condensation. I would also include pipe insulation in under here. The first thing to do if there's standing water under a pipe under the sink is to check if there's a leak, if there's a wastewater leak or a mains water leak, and there wasn't in this case. I also looked in on the other side of the wall to see whether there were defects, and while the wall doesn't look in perfect condition and there are signs of penetrating damp, they wouldn't cause standing water.
We unblocked it and we've very much kept on top of it since.
Okay.
So it hasn't been blocked for at least.
If you had rising damp, which you don't, it would be damp at the base of the wall everywhere.
Yeah, because I was expecting the skirting boards to have problems, or the parquet flooring as well, but.
So I use a damp meter to look for damp. The favoured one is a radio frequency damp meter, and you'll see that I've now gone to the neighbouring side of the wall to see if that's damp, and indeed it is damp. And here again it's condensation. It's forming around the radiator, which is off for large parts of the summer, and there's no kitchen ventilation here either. Interesting. Ah, so is that an old chimney breast?
Before we kept trying to top it up, and then it would just keep coming back.
Top it up with paint?
Yeah, and we've tried all sorts of.
So that's the damp proofers area. But not that any damp proofing is good, but this one seems like a less good one than even the normal bad one.
I'll see if I can find that certificate. I saw it the other day.
One of the greatest concerns about the damp proofing industry is they offer guarantees, but firstly, these guarantees are only against rising damp, so if the root cause isn't rising damp, then it's worthless. And secondly, the companies go bust every so often. If you had a genuine case of rising damp, then there would be high levels of subfloor humidity, unless you had very good subfloor ventilation, which you don't, because the front vent has been painted up and the rear vent has been blocked by decking to the rear. Subfloor ventilation is there as a safety measure should you have a leak, or indeed you have groundwater, but since you don't, it's not absolutely necessary and easy to monitor it from time to time. I'll show you how in the recommendations. The other thing is, if you had a genuine case of rising damp, you could easily test for it by drilling down a meter. So you want to put a tube about a meter down and test to see if there's water. If there is water there, then what you should do is test it on the other side of the property. If there's still water, you want to do all 4 sides of the property. The water level should be even for there to be rising damp. You may want to leave it for a day or so for the water to collect, but if there is a genuine case of rising damp, then they will be even. If one is higher than another, then you've probably got a damaged drain, which is at risk of causing rot and subsidence to the property. The last thing you want to do is treat it as rising damp. As I say, that isn't the case here, otherwise you'd have high levels of subfloor humidity, which you don't. So there's a leak here, and doesn't seem to be doing anything internally, but just keep an eye on it really.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a simple thing really. It just needs something to fill the gap, and you should be fine.
Yeah.
So the water was coming out of the gutter up there, was it?
Yeah, where the join, the cross bit of gutter, yeah, those are blocked.
And then you've got a bit of heat. Well, you've got an exposure there that could cause some heat loss. And down there, and your neighbours. Oh, that's no longer relevant. Okay, but I did notice some green down there, which is a sign of water, but would be connected with your gutter, presumably. Right. So looking at the thermal images where dark blue is colder than orange, we see that there's cold zone in the corner, which appears to be linked to residual damp from the flowing gutter, which explains why the high damp meter readings to the front of the property. It's not penetrating through, but it is causing heat loss, which increases the risk of condensation. I wouldn't go out of my way to have trickle vents, but if you've got them, it's better to have them open. So this property has insufficiently targeted ventilation, that is, good ventilation in the bathroom, kitchen, and when drying clothes, which can be made up for by using a dehumidifier. Unfortunately, the capacity is way too low. It's 10 litre per day capacity. You should have at least 20, and I would consider having 30 and using a fan to speed up the drying process.